We are live, and we are talking about the ACC power rankings. Then we'll dive deeper into Clemson, their win over Wake Forest, and their upcoming home game against Virginia. Before I dive into all that, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video. I appreciate you joining live. I'll be checking the comments throughout. As if you've been on one of these before, you know I like to show a lot of comments. So be sure to share your opinions as we go through this. Did want to let you know I won't be live next week. I'll be won't be able to be on, and then of course the bye week. So this might be the last live show for a little bit, so definitely participate in this one. So let's get the rankings up there. All right, so here we have it. So the bottom of the power rankings, we have a new bottom feeder in NC State. NC State loses this week at home to Syracuse. That's back-to-back home losses now for them, with losing at home in Raleigh to Wake Forest, and then turning around and losing at home to Syracuse. I think Syracuse is pretty good, so I don't think that's the worst loss in the world. But it's just crazy to think before the season, imagine picking them to lose back-to-back home games to Wake and Syracuse, right? It would have been unthinkable. They're one of the two, easily one of the two biggest disappointments in the conference, them and Florida State. Florida State's the team above them. They had the week off, so just by virtue of not losing for once, they finally hop NC State. But those two teams, really, really disappointing. Florida State obviously was picked to win the conference, so more disappointing in that respect. But NC State was more than a dark horse candidate to win the ACC. Talk was about Florida State and then Miami, Clemson. And then there was a little bit of a drop-off, but not a huge one, to NC State. And the dark horses were more so like Louisville and Virginia Tech. So those were sort of the six teams that were thought to have like a real shot to win it. And as we'll see, as we talk about towards the end, two of those were right. And then there was a team that everyone forgot that actually has a very, very realistic chance to win the conference. So we'll talk about them in a bit. Let me advance this. Okay. Then this next group, Wake Forest, Stanford, and Cal. Wake Forest lost to Clemson. We'll obviously talk about that more at the end of this video when we dive deeper into Clemson. But I thought Wake's defense was abysmal. That's all the stats that coming in. And aside from those first two drives where they forced punts, that was the case. But even in those first two drives, that was all about Clemson. Cade Klubnik was missing throws. And I'll talk about that more when we get to Clemson. But I thought Wake's defense was really bad. Conversely, I thought their offense was pretty solid. They've got a really good running back, Damon Claiborne. They've got some good receivers. Donovan Green was out, and Clemson's cornerbacks, frankly, are better than their receivers. But I still felt the Wake had a good offense in general. They had some big plays. They moved the ball at times, especially early in the game. They were shut out in the second half. So I didn't think the team was all bad, but that's a bad defense, and it's a bottom four team in the ACC. At Stanford, they got blown out by Notre Dame. A lot of teams are going to get blown out by Notre Dame, but since they went to Syracuse and won that game, they've now lost 3 in a row by 24 plus points. So I don't know if they've regressed or if their performance at Syracuse was a fluke. It could just be that it's got to be one of the two. Their competitiveness against Clemson the first half in Death Valley feels a little fluky now. So I've dropped them just a hair. They were 12 last week. And then Cal had 14 last week. I've moved them up to 12. They keep losing, but at the same time, they were very competitive with Miami. They were very competitive with Pitt. So are they just a team that's going to be a tough out, but are always going to get out? Or are they going to start winning some of these? They've only lost to Pitt really because of this field goal. So more on Pitt when we get there, but that does kind of make me question Pitt a little bit. Yeah, so this is a great point by Kevin. They're very close to being undefeated in ACC play. At the same time, like, who have they beaten? Like, they had that win against Auburn that everyone thought was great, but turns out Auburn's no good. They're beating like UC Davis, so they haven't beat anyone. They're just close in all these losses. So I don't know about them. I'll admit I was a little too down on them before, but I'm still not super high on them, and that's why above them I have Duke, who had the week off, and then Virginia, who lost to Louisville. So we'll skip over Duke because they had the week off. Well, just real quick on Duke. They play Florida State next week. I think that's a really interesting game that will make a lot of movement. this is the part of the season now where I can't base it all just on what I think. It's got to be about the record too, and you're trying to blend those to some extent. They are power rankings, so it is heavily on how good you are. But I can't just ignore Florida State just loses almost every game, right? Except that one game they beat Cal, but they just keep losing. So I have to put them lower. But do I really think they're the 16th best team in the conference? If they played North Carolina or Wake Forest, I'd probably pick Florida State, especially at home. If they played Stanford, I think I might pick Florida State. So that's where this is getting tricky, and Duke and Florida State will help kind of set that course. Either one will probably move 3, maybe even 4 spots, depending on the outcome of that game. So it's a big mover game. Of course, for Duke, it's a big step towards bowl eligibility, which they're highly probable to get early in bowl positioning. For Florida State, it's just pride because they're probably not making a bowl. Virginia, they lost to Louisville at home in front of a really bad looking crowd, really empty crowd. Really disappointing, honestly, because they're having a decent year. But they were right there. They led. I don't have the time, but they seem like they led as much as Louisville. It seemed like they were very even teams. So are they bad? I don't know. I think this is where you start getting to that kind of muddy middle of the ACC, where I don't think any of them are particularly good, but they're also not terrible. I think Virginia maybe has elevated out of terrible into that kind of murky middle of the conference. But I will say this: they're 4-2. They have wins over Boston College, not bad. Wake Forest, it was a close win, but it was a comeback on the road. We'll give them some credit. Coastal Carolina and Richmond. So not, world beaters. And then they have lost to Louisville and Maryland. So, okay. It's hard to know really a whole lot of anything on that. But here's what they have upcoming. 4 of their next 5 opponents are ranked. And then they end at Lane Stadium, where they don't historically win. So they go to Clemson, then they get North Carolina. That should be a win. That should be win number 5. Then they go to Pittsburgh, to Notre Dame. You would expect those to be losses, although they could steal one. Then they host SMU. I'm starting to believe in SMU. I think they look good. I watched them play Louisville, and I was impressed. I think their offensive line is taking a lot of strides. So I think that's a loss. And they go to Lane Stadium, where I think Virginia Tech's better than them. I think they're more talented than them. And they're at home, and they just tend to win that rivalry game more times than not. So a bowl is, even at 4-2, a bowl right now is maybe 50-50, right? So we'll see where they finish. They could be a team that drops a bit. Boston College and Virginia Tech had the week off, and they will play on Thursday, which is a pretty interesting game. And it'll kind of decide sort of like the kings of this murky middle of the conference. Then you go up. I think Georgia Tech and Syracuse are perhaps I guess I tend to have a high opinion of Virginia Tech. Maybe that's a residual of me being so wrong about them coming into the season and thinking they would be so good. But I think Georgia Tech is maybe a cut above, at least from Boston College down. I tend to be impressed with Georgia Tech. That impressive, although they won. They needed a late score to beat North Carolina. It was a 68-yard Jamal Haynes touchdown run to close out a victory. North Carolina, battles is tied with like 20 seconds to go when they give up this long run. And that's how Georgia Tech wins. So another win, that's great, but not the most impressive way to do it. And now they go to Mercedes-Benz. So I guess it's kind of a home game. I would imagine it's probably going to be a lot of Notre Dame fans, but they're playing where the Falcons play against Notre Dame. I'm not a huge believer in Notre Dame, but I do think Notre Dame, obviously is a hair better than Louisville. I think they're maybe slightly more than that better than Georgia Tech. Syracuse, let's see. Yes. Good point before we move on from Virginia Tech. Good point by Kevin here. That I wouldn't call it a near victory. It's a loss to Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt beat Kentucky on Saturday, and obviously they were coming off the Alabama win. Vanderbilt, maybe they pulled their record. Vanderbilt may be a middle of the pack SEC team at this point. So that loss isn't looking so bad. Of course, Virginia Tech also lost to Rutgers, which is looking that bad. Yeah, Vanderbilt lost to Georgia State. They did lose to Missouri, which isn't that terrible, but they're 4-2 with wins over Alabama, road win at Kentucky. They have the win against Virginia Tech and a win at Alcorn State, but pretty bad to lose at Georgia State. Georgia State is not good. And then they had a close loss at Missouri, which is not awful, but So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pound them too hard for losing to that Vanderbilt game. Definitely need to mention that loss isn't horrific anymore. But look, it's still Vanderbilt. It's not like Vanderbilt turned into LSU or something. And then there's Syracuse. They went on the road and they beat NC State. I mentioned that before. They'll have an open date and then they'll play Pitt. And I think Syracuse and Pitt are pretty close. So that's gonna be a really interesting game. Pitt's got a tough schedule coming up. So we'll see if Pitt's really ready for it. So then you have Louisville, Pittsburgh, and here's where there's some movement and things get a little interesting. Sorry. Okay, so Louisville, they go on the road to Scott Stadium. They beat Virginia, but they look like dead even teams. They pull away or they score within the final 2 minutes to win the game. Great win, but well, I mean, it's great that they won, but a really good team would beat Virginia by more. We'll see if Clemson does that this coming weekend. So not the most impressive, kind of like Georgia Tech. You got to win against a conference opponent, road, but like if you're that good, you're going to beat Virginia by more than a couple points. So I've been penalizing Pitt because I don't really believe in them. They're winning these close games, like they won close against Cal. They're eking out these wins. They had a fairly close one against North Carolina. Their non-conference wins, Cincinnati was really close. I think that's the one where they needed the disconcerting signals call for it to work. So look, if Pitt's not looking good, and I've been hesitant all year to move them up, well, Louisville's win, not that impressive. So it's 6-0. Pittsburgh makes the move to go above Louisville. And with that, Pittsburgh 6-0 for the first time since 1982. So good for them. Their schedule is going to really toughen up, though. Like I said, they've had those close kind of, really close wins over mediocre opponents, but they keep winning. But now they get the week off. Then they play that Thursday game against Syracuse, and they get SMU, and then they have Virginia. Shortly thereafter that, they got Clemson. So they could finish 3-3 from here on out. I could see 2-4 from here on out. So they have 6 wins, but I don't think they hit 10. So that's why I'm not. I've got them. They're undefeated, and I have 2 teams with a loss above them. And up until this week, I had them below 2-loss Louisville, right? So that's a little bit of the inner workings there. Yeah, Kevin again. They look vulnerable. John saying their defense looks shaky. I don't know their defense looks shaky. I mean, Virginia didn't score a ton on them. They're just not super talented. I think Shuck is perfectly good, but I don't know that he's special. So yeah, I mean, they're okay. I'm not particularly concerned about them coming into Clemson and picking up a win. They've never beat Clemson, and they're not as good as I expected them to be. Let's say that. And I think Jeff Brom's a great offensive mind. So, what does that say about their talent level if this is all they're doing with that? So then you get into the top 3. SMU had off. So they're going to sit there and then in number 3, and then they're going to go to Stanford next weekend, where I expect them to pick up the win. And this is the team where I said they were not in those kind of 6 teams that people thought could viably win the conference. But it looks like they can, right? It definitely looks like they can. When you look at their upcoming schedule, I'll pull it up here. They could run the table, and that could set up some really, really interesting situations. So they go to Stanford, 8 p.m. ACC Network this Saturday. After that, they have Duke on the road, Pitt at home, which will be tough, Boston College at home, Virginia on the road, which could be tough, but if they're as good as we think, that should be a win, and Cal at home. Very possible they go 7-1, or winning, just dropping one of those. It's not unrealistic they could run the table. They could go 8-0 in their first year in the ACC, which is wild. But if Florida State is obviously way worse than expected, that was their first game, and then Louisville maybe a little bit worse than expected. They dodged Miami, they dodged Clemson, so things broke their way. Honestly, it would be kind of cool if they did it. I was not a fan of the expansion. I definitely did not want Cal, didn't really want Stanford, but SMU gets into the Texas market. Pretty cool place. I've been there before. I've actually been to a game there. I'd like to see them do it. And that brings up an interesting question. So if SMU, Miami, and Clemson are all tied, they don't play each other. So depending on how the tiebreaker goes, let's say Clemson gets left out. They're 11-1 and they don't go. Is that a disaster? Let me know in the comments. Is that bad? Are you mad? Or are you actually savoring the situation where you don't have to go win a conference game to make the playoff? At 11-1, you're probably already in as an at-large, and you might get to host a home playoff game, which would be pretty cool. I mean, Clemson hosting Notre Dame, LSU, Tennessee, a team like that. Probably not a Penn State, but it could be a really solid big-time opponent. I mean, it wouldn't be the Group of 5 champion; they'd be the 12 seed. So I think it's pretty cool. And conversely, if they win all those games, Clemson's undefeated in conference play. They go to the conference championship, and let's say I don't think it'll happen, but let's say they lose bad to SMU or Miami, they probably get left out at that point. So no home game, no game at all, and they're in some bowl game, which if they win is whatever, because then the story is just Clemson was unfairly treated and all that. So let me know, like, do you care if Clemson wins a 3-way tiebreaker? Because I want to win the ACC, but I don't know how much I care. I think my perspective has been shifted a bit by last year's Clemson basketball team that laid an egg in against Boston College in that ACC tournament, and that actually propelled them to success in the tournament people actually care about, the NCAA tournament. So in hindsight, I'm glad that Clemson basketball team lost to BC, because we wouldn't have this memorable Elite Eight, probably the greatest team in school history, the 2 best wins, Baylor and Arizona, in school history for the basketball program, if not for that loss. So do you care if Clemson loses a tiebreaker and doesn't have to play in Charlotte and gets to go right to the playoff and host a home game instead of playing a neutral site game in Charlotte in the cold at night? I don't know. John here says, no way SMU can beat Miami or Clemson to me. Well, they don't play them is the thing. And so maybe SMU, Clemson, and Miami are all undefeated. SMU goes and they lose to Miami, and Clemson is in the playoff along with Miami, who's the 3 or 4 seed, as the conference champion. I think that's a fine situation. And I don't know, man. I don't know that SMU can't beat Miami. I mean, Virginia Tech more or less beat Miami, and their call was overturned, but there was a time where Virginia Tech had just beat Miami until the replay refs or replay officials overturned it. So SMU is better than Virginia Tech, and SMU is way better than Cal. So yeah, I think they could. But it's not the rankings here, Kevin, that determine it. It would be some combination of like who they played, what are the records of the teams they played, and then it goes to analytics. So it's not really the playoff rankings, and the rankings we have now are AP anyway. And Clemson's schedule, Clemson's got Pitt, but who else do they have, right? So I don't know that Clemson's schedule is going to give them movement. They're just waiting on other teams to lose. You see, like LSU was behind Clemson. They beat Ole Miss. That's better than anyone Clemson has. So Ole Miss falls behind Clemson. LSU jumps Clemson, as they should. And that's kind of how it goes. So then let's talk Miami. So they had the week off. Miami will go to Louisville. Great comment here. Great comment here by John. Miami is vulnerable against Louisville. We'll see. I mean, if Miami plays like they did against Virginia Tech and Cal, Louisville's better than those teams, so they'll lose. They're going to go on the road, much tougher environment. They were at home against Cal. They were at home both of those. So now they're going to go on the road. That's a tough stadium. I mean, it's not like the toughest in the world, but it's good. I've been there. It's a solid home field advantage. If they play like their defense and their turnovers, they could lose to Louisville. Now, I don't think they will. I think they'll snap into gear after this open date and they'll look awesome. But wouldn't be the worst thing. So that'll be interesting. And Jay here is right. Clemson has the worst ACC opponents. SMU is pretty similar. Pitt and Louisville for them. Those are their big 2. We haven't played Pitt yet, but this will be our big 2. So pretty similar, but yeah, I mean, Clemson is fortunate because Clemson, well, depending on your perspective, but in terms of the ease of going 8-0, Clemson's fortunate because NC State and Florida State, those teams were supposed to be really good. They were on Clemson's schedule. It seemed like Clemson had a really tough schedule with them and Louisville. Well, NC State's awful. Florida State's awful. Louisville's good, but not as good as we thought. And Clemson dodges Miami, SMU, and Syracuse. So that's, one of the easier paths to 8-0. And then you look at SMU. They play Pitt. They play Louisville. They dodge Miami. They dodge Syracuse, and they dodge Clemson. So really, SMU and Clemson, extremely similar schedules in terms of what they dodge and their path.